Wilkomu toches kanal plius esubiscarabai ts tankiu. At the core of every living being is an energy that drives reproduction, attraction, and connection. But this energy, often labeled simply as lust, is far more than a biological mechanism. It is one of the most concentrated and potent forms of life force a human can access. It's the surge that animates the body, ignites the imagination, and sharpens ambition. It manifests not only in physical desire but also in the hunger to create, to build, to influence, to be remembered. When we talk about sexual energy, we're not merely discussing something erotic or indulgent. We're referring to the raw, unfiltered energy that wants to move outward into the world. It fuels dreams, passions, and the impulse to reach beyond the self. It's the same energy that makes a person obsessively pursue mastery, throw themselves into the act of painting, writing, composing, strategizing, leading. It is the internal pressure that, if left unchanneled, can consume a person, or if cultivated, can empower them to leave something lasting behind. This energy is visceral, magnetic, and deeply tied to the body, but it doesn't stop there. It rises. It wants to ascend from the base toward the mind, toward the soul, toward the act of creation itself. That's why some of the most groundbreaking works of art, the most daring innovations, and the most impactful movements in history often spring from individuals who possessed a fierce, almost uncontrollable inner fire. They didn't always act on their lust in a carnal sense. Instead, they let it evolve, letting it push them to explore new ideas, to craft visions bigger than themselves, to strive toward transcendence in their own domain. Sexual energy, when left unchecked, often seeks immediate release. It's a natural instinct rooted in biology, a drive for pleasure, reproduction, and connection. But when examined more deeply, this same energy contains immense creative and transformative potential. The key lies in how it is directed. Sublimation is the psychological process by which raw sexual desire is redirected away from momentary gratification and toward higher, often socially or personally valuable pursuits, such as art, leadership, innovation, or spiritual discipline. This concept doesn't require suppression. It's not about denying lust or pretending it doesn't exist. On the contrary, it begins with acknowledging the full intensity of one's desire. Desire is powerful. It is disruptive. It can dominate thought and behavior. But if a person chooses to engage with this energy consciously, not repress it, but refine it, they can use it as fuel for growth. The most compelling artists, spiritual leaders, and visionaries throughout history often had intense, almost unruly inner lives. Yet many of them learned to channel their passions into purpose. The act of sublimation is a kind of inner alchemy. It transforms a primal urge into refined action. Instead of seeking pleasure in the flesh, one begins to seek pleasure in the process of building, writing, composing, solving, leading, or enduring. That doesn't mean the energy disappears. It means it changes form. The same charge that could drive someone to obsession or addiction can be transmuted into the persistence needed to complete a manuscript, launch a business, or guide a movement. Consider the psychological mechanics. When sexual energy is activated, the body enters a state of heightened arousal. Focus sharpens, motivation intensifies. In that state, the mind is capable of great imaginative leaps. But when this state is repeatedly spent on quick gratification, the mind never learns to hold and direct the energy toward long-term objectives. Sublimation, then, is an act of discipline and vision. It requires the capacity to delay gratification, not to reject pleasure entirely, but to recognize that greater satisfaction comes through achievement, contribution, and inner alignment. In practical terms, this might mean transforming the craving for intimacy into a deep desire to connect with humanity through art, or using the tension of longing not to seduce a lover, but to build a legacy that seduces minds, inspires hearts, and outlives the creator. It might mean acknowledging that lust, in its essence, is a longing to merge with something greater, and realizing that creation, whether it's a book, a company, a philosophy, or a movement, offers a kind of union that transcends physicality. This is not a process reserved for monks, mystics, or reclusive geniuses. It is available to anyone willing to do the inner work. It requires mindfulness, reflection, and the ability to sit with one's own restless hunger without immediately acting on it. The moment that energy is paused, not silenced, but held, it becomes available for redirection. A person might find themselves writing poetry instead of texting an ex. They might spend a sleepless night drafting a business plan instead of chasing a fleeting encounter. They might choose to confront their longing not with escapism, but with vision. This doesn't mean the path is without struggle. Sublimation demands self-awareness. It requires recognizing the difference between what the body craves and what the soul longs for. It also demands courage, because holding on to that fire, instead of extinguishing it or releasing it, can be deeply uncomfortable. But it is precisely in that discomfort that transformation happens. The friction between desire and restraint creates pressure, and that pressure, if properly held, can erupt in bursts of insight, creativity, and ambition that surpass anything momentary satisfaction could offer. Sublimation allows a person to convert what is often labeled as lust into something far more enduring. It makes space for greatness by inviting the individual to stop running from their urges and start working with them. This process doesn't just change what someone does, it changes who they become. It's an act of inner leadership, of choosing direction over distraction, and of allowing the most primal energies to serve the highest ambitions. Within every person exists a fundamental conflicting, the pull of raw instinct and the push of higher aspiration. On one hand, the body urges immediate satisfaction, through touch, consumption, indulgence. On the other, there is a deep longing to rise above impulse, to create something meaningful, to become someone of substance. This internal tension is not a flaw, it is the crucible in which greatness is forged. The struggle itself is essential. Without resistance, there is no transformation. Without friction, there is no spark. Lust is one of the most powerful manifestations of instinct. It is urgent, physical, irrational. It speaks in sensation rather than thought. But the human being is not only a creature of biology, there is also the mind, the vision, the will, the ability to imagine a future beyond the present urge. This is where aspiration lies. Aspiration does not deny the existence of instinct, but it aims to guide it. It seeks to harness the fire without letting it burn the house down. The path from lust to legacy depends on how a person engages with this inner divide. To fall entirely into instinct is to live reactively, to chase pleasure without purpose. To deny instinct altogether is to become rigid, disconnected, and emotionally dry. The art lies in integration, not destruction but transformation. Instinct becomes the raw material, aspiration becomes the sculptor. The tension between these forces is often experienced as a kind of personal torment. There is the craving for intimacy, attention, or release. And alongside it, the awareness that giving in too easily can fracture discipline, dilute focus, or compromise integrity. This is not about shame or moral judgment, it is about energy. Every act of indulgence expends energy. The more energy is scattered across momentary desires, the less is available for sustained creation. But when energy is conserved and directed, it becomes power. Not power over others, but power over one's own potential. Throughout life, people are repeatedly tested by this duality. The artist who must choose between escapism and expression. The entrepreneur torn between fleeting distraction and long-term vision. The seeker who stands between the comfort of pleasure and the challenge of growth. These crossroads are not occasional, they are daily, and each choice contributes to the shaping of identity. One becomes what one consistently chooses under pressure. What makes this struggle so potent is that it engages both the primal and the spiritual at once. Lust is not just physical, it is symbolic. It represents longing, hunger, incompleteness. Aspiration is not just ambition, it is the drive to become whole. When a person chooses to endure the tension rather than escape it, something begins to change within. They begin to hold their desire like a musician holds a note, not releasing it too early, not silencing it, but letting it build into something beautiful. This capacity to hold tension without collapse is one of the most underrated sources of personal power. At the societal level, most systems are built either to indulge instinct or to suppress it. Rarely are people taught how to work with it. Pleasure is marketed as the ultimate reward, and discipline is often portrayed as sterile or joyless. But those who achieve meaningful greatness know otherwise. They understand that mastery is born not from avoiding desire, but from standing in the fire of it without being consumed. They understand that every instinctual urge is a test, a question asking, will you follow or will you lead? Aspiration does not seek to eliminate instinct. It seeks to elevate it. It turns the pursuit of sex into the pursuit of connection, the hunger for control into the practice of leadership, the need for attention into the desire to contribute something lasting. This does not happen all at once. It happens through repetition, reflection, and the constant decision to use inner conflict as fuel rather than as an excuse to retreat. Discipline is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for rigidity, restriction, or a kind of denial of pleasure. But discipline, in its truest form, is freedom. Not freedom from desire, but freedom within it. It is the structure that holds immense power without letting it spill. In the context of sexual energy, discipline becomes the container that allows the raw, chaotic force of lust to be transformed into focused, purposeful action. It is the bridge between fleeting impulse and enduring legacy. Sexual energy, like any energy, needs direction. Left without aim, it becomes noise, distraction, compulsive behavior, emotional confusion. But with discipline, this energy can be sharpened into intention. It can fuel consistent work, creative breakthroughs, and the long, slow construction of something meaningful. People often seek the spark, the passion, the excitement, but the truth is, sparks are easy. What's rare is the ability to hold that spark day after day and let it become a steady flame. That's what discipline does. It turns moments of inspiration into sustained movement. The modern world doesn't make this easy. Everywhere there are invitations to indulge. Instant gratification is not just available, it's celebrated. Devices, apps, media, and culture all promise the thrill of the moment, the rush of dopamine, the escape from discomfort. But this comes at a cost. The more one surrenders to impulse, the harder it becomes to hear the deeper calling of legacy. The deeper work, creating something lasting, becoming someone of substance, requires silence, solitude, discomfort, and focus. It requires the patience to resist what is easy in favor of what is essential. Discipline is not the enemy of desire. It is the refinement of it. It doesn't kill passion. It sharpens it, channels it. A person who practices restraint doesn't become less alive. They become more potent. Their energy isn't spent randomly. It is stored, concentrated, ready to be used when it matters most. This is especially true for sexual energy. The act of delaying gratification, of not immediately reacting to every urge, develops an inner tension that can be used to fuel long-term goals. That tension, when directed consciously, becomes drive. Legacy is not built in moments of indulgence. It is built in the hours when no one is watching. In the daily habits, the small sacrifices, the choices to stay committed when it would be easier to give in. Discipline creates the foundation on which greatness can stand. Without it, even the most talented individuals falter. With it, even the most ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. The path from lust to legacy depends not on perfection, but on consistency. The choice, again and again, to direct one's energy rather than dissipate it. This kind of discipline doesn't arise from shame or self-punishment. It arises from clarity. When a person is deeply connected to a purpose, when they have a vision that matters more than comfort, discipline becomes a natural expression of that commitment. It is not about avoiding pleasure. It is about choosing a different kind of pleasure, the pleasure of knowing that every step taken is building something that will last. The satisfaction of knowing that temporary desires were transformed into lasting contribution. To live with discipline is to live with design. It means knowing that energy is finite and that where it is placed matters. It means turning down distractions not out of fear, but out of reverence for what is being built. It means recognizing that legacy doesn't emerge from chaos, it emerges from coherence. Discipline is the artist returning to the canvas, the writer returning to the page, the leader returning to the mission. It is the daily act of remembering what matters more than the urge of the moment. Discipline in this context is not a rejection of sexual energy. It is its evolution. It is the act of lifting desire out of the purely physical realm and into the realm of intention and impact. Where lust seeks release, discipline seeks transformation. Where lust is concerned with now, discipline is concerned with what endures. Through discipline, desire becomes fuel, not for consumption but for creation. Throughout history, some of the most influential figures, those whose legacies continue to shape art, science, politics, and philosophy, were not detached from desire but deeply immersed in it. They were not free from lust, ambition, or emotional complexity. Instead, they learned how to take those intense inner drives and repurpose them into something greater. What set them apart was not the absence of temptation, but the ability to convert that primal energy into disciplined creation, strategic vision, and enduring influence. Consider Leonardo da Vinci. His journals reveal a man of immense sensuality, curiosity, and vitality. He was fascinated by the human body, not just artistically but anatomically. His interest in form, motion, beauty, and proportion all speak to a mind alive with erotic energy, not necessarily in a sexualized way, but in the broader sense of being animated by desire. Yet rather than chase superficial pleasures, he turned that force inward and upward, producing works of staggering genius in multiple fields. His sexual energy was sublimated into art, invention, and exploration, becoming a cornerstone of the Renaissance. Another example is Nikola Tesla, often described as celibate and intensely devoted to his work. It would be easy to assume he simply lacked desire, but the truth is likely more complex. Tesla was obsessed with ideas, with possibilities, with visions of the future. His refusal to indulge in romantic or physical relationships did not come from denial, but from a deliberate choice to transmute his energy into innovation. He understood that his creative output was directly tied to how he managed his life force, and he chose to channel it entirely into his work. The intensity of his abstention was not a void, but a redirection of power. In a different realm, we see this transformation in figures like Mahatma Gandhi. Known for his vow of celibacy and radical self-discipline, Gandhi's struggle with desire was openly documented. He did not pretend to be immune to lust or emotional need. Instead, he used that struggle as fuel for a greater purpose: freedom, justice, and social transformation. His choice to wrestle with and refine his desires was not just about personal morality. It was about conserving energy for a cause that transcended the self. His spiritual and political influence stemmed, in part, from the way he engaged with inner tension and refused to let instinct dominate his mission. Even in the world of literature and art, figures like Frida Kahlo, James Joyce, and Anna Nin demonstrate how sexual energy can fuel creative expression. Their works were saturated with passion, intimacy, pain, and longing, but those feelings were not confined to their private lives. They became raw materials for public contribution. The intensity of their desire did not diminish their brilliance, it informed it. What made them extraordinary was their capacity to externalize inner chaos into something others could feel, see, and be moved by. These examples reflect a pattern among individuals who embraced their inner fire, but did not let it burn them down. They didn't deny their urges, nor did they become slaves to them. Instead, they entered into a kind of contract with their own desire. They allowed it to inform their work, to energize their pursuits, to push them toward excellence. This kind of transformation is not a mystery. It is a process available to anyone who is willing to hold on to their energy long enough for it to mature into something greater. Desire, in its raw form, seeks expression. It wants to move, to act, to break boundaries. Left unexamined, it can lead to self-destruction or chaos. But when shaped, directed, and held with awareness, it becomes a driver of legacy. The historical figures we admire most often battled deeply with their instincts. They were not above temptation, they were forged by it. What they mastered was not celibacy or perfection, but the art of redirection. Their lives reveal that lust, when elevated, can become genius, and that the energy we often try to suppress may in fact be the very source of our most lasting contributions. In today's world, the potential of sexual energy is largely misunderstood, misused, or ignored altogether. Surrounded by distractions, overstimulation, and endless opportunities for instant gratification, many people remain disconnected from the deeper purpose of their own desire. Sexual energy, once revered as a force of creation and transformation, has been reduced to entertainment, exploited commercially, and treated as a commodity rather than a sacred inner resource. But beneath the noise and numbness lies a dormant power, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be used consciously. This awakening begins with awareness. Most people experience sexual energy as a momentary wave of impulse, a fleeting emotion or bodily urge. But when approached with intention, it becomes clear that this energy is far more than a biological reflex. It is a current that can energize the entire being. It can sharpen mental focus, heighten emotional intensity, and infuse the body with vitality. Rather than allowing it to be dispersed through compulsive behavior or aimless indulgence, it can be stored, refined, and redirected toward growth. In practical terms, this means changing the way one responds to desire. Instead of chasing release, one learns to observe the urge, to sit with it, to feel its power without immediately seeking an outlet. This practice is not about repression. It is about reclamation. It is about pulling energy back from the outside world and letting it rise through the system. That rise is not always comfortable. It brings with it restlessness, discomfort, and sometimes even emotional confrontation. But these are signs that something real is happening, that the energy is no longer being wasted, but being transformed. Many people report that when they begin to retain and redirect their sexual energy through practices like meditation, breathwork, celibacy, creative expression, or physical training, they experience a surge of clarity and drive. Projects that once felt impossible suddenly begin to move forward. Emotions become more intense but also more manageable. Connections become deeper, because they are no longer based solely on attraction but on purpose. This shift is not mystical, it is chemical, neurological, emotional, and spiritual all at once. The modern individual faces unique challenges when it comes to harnessing this power. The constant availability of stimulation, through screens, social media, pornography, and superficial relationships, makes it difficult to build the discipline required to hold and redirect energy. It's easy to forget that every act of indulgence carries a cost: attention, time, emotional coherence. When these are constantly scattered, it becomes nearly impossible to concentrate energy long enough to build anything lasting. Awakening sexual energy, therefore, requires reclaiming control of attention, protecting focus, and learning how to convert inner tension into outer action. This process isn't limited to artists, monks, or elite performers. It's available to anyone who chooses to engage with their life more consciously. Whether it's used to start a business, write a novel, build a stronger body, or deepen a relationship, sexual energy becomes a source of inner leadership. It is the current that, when recognized and refined, fuels movement toward one's potential. It gives rise not only to creative output but also to resilience, the ability to stay with difficult emotions, to move through challenges, and to keep going when motivation fades. In a culture obsessed with speed and surface-level pleasure, choosing to work with sexual energy in a deeper way becomes a radical act. It requires patience, honesty, and courage. It requires letting go of quick highs in order to access sustained strength. But once the energy is reclaimed, it becomes a fire that doesn't burn out. It becomes momentum that doesn't depend on external reward. It becomes identity, not based on performance or appearance, but rooted in self-knowledge and directed purpose. This approach also deepens spiritual and emotional awareness. As the energy moves upward, through thought, creativity, and service, it begins to align the individual with something larger than the self. The urge for connection becomes the urge to contribute. The pull toward physical union becomes the push toward creating impact. The body becomes not a battlefield of temptation but a vessel of transformation. This shift doesn't erase desire, it integrates it, honoring it as a sacred part of what drives growth, purpose, and transcendence.